Welcome inside a special episode of Point to the Passer to give y'all an update on a couple of transfers. First, Jonathan Powell of West Virginia committed on April 1st, and most recently, 7-foot big man Henri Veesaar out of Arizona commits today, April 4th. Both of these are solid additions to Carolina's roster for next season, and now the focus also turns to point guard, which is a bit more complicated, so we're going to break it all down. But let's start with the positives, Jonathan. A nice get for Jim Tanner's team today.
Literally a huge get, both in terms of, well, literal and
Massive.
figurative, right? In terms of his size, but also what he can bring to UNC. This is still a relatively young player. He's a redshirt sophomore who comes in with potentially 2 years of eligibility. He's a legitimate pro prospect by all accounts. Definitely a lot of NBA attention and possibilities there, both in terms of his size and mobility at 7 feet, but also his emerging skill set. There's a lot of, I think, ways to go for him in terms of the potential development. So this is both a guy that raises your floor inside and should come in and probably start right away at the center position. But he also is somebody that his best basketball is likely to come. And if you can get him as close as you can to his ceiling in college anyway next year, he's somebody that could really be a huge impact player in the ACC and even nationally, I think, too.
Yeah, I'm excited about Veesaar. Having a true big man always important to Carolina, and you saw how much I think the difference between having Baycott on the team and not a true big with it being a threat down low, how it really hurt Carolina in terms of spreading the floor and limiting that. And it's a trickle down effect. It limits guys like RJ from being able to get to their space when a big guy down low is not drawing a double. And so somebody with such an intimidating presence and so much upside is a really exciting get for Carolina. As you said, now we just need someone to pass him the ball. And so point guard is going to be another one that we talk about in some of the options that are narrowing down a little bit and maybe actually a lot the last 24 to 48 hours. But yeah, super excited about Veesaar. I already saw some Duke fans trying to troll. Oh, he's coming to Carolina so he can lose to Duke again, blah, blah, blah. All right, look, we're not going to buy that. Y'all just focus on this season. We can leave the trash talk a little bit more till the offseason.
Yeah, and the thing is, they just played him in the Sweet 16, and he more than held his own in that game. You like his toughness. I think there are still some questions for him when he goes up against players who are about the same size, other 7-footers or guys in the same range. Can he play bully ball, right? Can he be physical enough in the post? But he definitely has a good, a good variety of post moves. So you can get, this is a guy unlike we had last year, really, where you have an anchor in the post, but he can do a lot of other things too. He's got pretty good vision and ability to pass. He is still working on building up his percentages from three as well. He was low 30s last year, but in conference play, he was closer to like 36, 37%. So this is somebody that can do a lot of different things. I think the bigger question is, how do you utilize him? So that's my question, because he can work in the pick and roll game. He's definitely a lob threat, but there's a lot of different things that he can do. And so my hope is that you get to see all of those different skills on display and see him kind of take that next step forward. As somebody, again, who he only played maybe 7 minutes a game as a freshman and then didn't play for a whole year. Last year was 20 minutes. So he's still somebody who is building that experience level. I think in a full-time starting role, he could really, really take off.
Some of the moves that he was doing as a 7-footer, I mean, gliding through the air, the dribbling skills, things that you just mentioned. What are you most excited to see in terms of the fit at Carolina and where he can really excel?
I think honestly, it's the defense as a starting point. I mean, this is a guy who he brings a serious level of rim protection. He also is very mobile. So there's even a chance that you could, if you wanted to, play him at multiple positions. So I think if you wanted to have a bigger lineup, you could even have Lubin as your small ball guy. I would just keep him at the five. He's somebody that mobility wise, quicker players, it's gonna be really difficult for him at the four. But Vesar, maybe. I think it would have to be something that you test out. But like you said, his mobility is impressive, both his lateral quickness and his ability to just with his wingspan erase shots and really challenge things at the rim. I think that's number one. But on the other side of it, a serious lob threat, a guy that
Yeah.
he does want to dunk everything, and he can get to the rim in some different ways. through the different moves that he has through the post. But um, I guess it's kind of what we were looking for from a Hubert Davis big, where somebody that can score inside but also can step out. And we really haven't had somebody who's the full package that way, and I think he has the potential to do it. So offensively, I'm really excited about that. But there's just a lot of versatility, and he and Caleb Wilson together fit really well. They're both plus defenders, and they're both versatile on offense. So I'm really excited about them as a combination.
Yeah, he obviously gives us the length we need, but Caleb's got some height to him, and so we're starting to get a little more size already than we did last year, and that's obviously huge for teams. I mean, you look like a team like Duke right now, who it's not really starting a guy who's, if I'm not mistaken, shorter than 6'6" or so, maybe 6'5". So size is important, especially when it comes to defense. It's going to be huge. But yeah, I mean, absolutely enormous get for Jim Tanner, his second one of the off season, or I guess in season, whatever you call it for the portal. Absolutely
Right.
wild, wild west right now. Who knows what's going on? But there's a lot of movement in the point guard position as well. But before we jump into that, anything else on Veesaar? We can kind of pivot to Jonathan Powell as well. Another big get that came in on the first day of April.
No, I mean this is just a really huge deal because centers out of the portal are there just are not as many, and they usually for that reason because there's limited supply available, the demand and the market for centers is usually pretty high. So for them to be able to get him early is really important. Now you have to fill out some of the other positions. And point guard is the next one that with Cadeau leaving for Michigan, you got to get that figured out because similar to center in some ways. I mean, there's more point guards that are available, but it is also a unique skill set at that position. So anyway, but I mean, to me, that's the big statement that all right, this is the guy we wanted. He comes in the portal, presumably for Carolina. He was between UNC and going back to Arizona. So you land him, that's huge, even if it is tempered a little bit by the news of missing out on a point guard target like 30 minutes before that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm super stoked on it. Appreciate the breakdown there. Pivoting a little bit over to our first commit and Jonathan Powell. He is a guard out of West Virginia who averages about 8.3 points per game, about 3.1 rebounds per game. Just a freshman, so he'll be going into his sophomore year. Another one, as I see it, that really can be a pure shooter, help spread the floor, provide some point scoring, but also has an upside in terms of development, right? This is a guy who averaged almost 30 minutes a game for West Virginia, and kind of like Veesaar, a younger guy that has a really exciting opportunity here with a program at Carolina that is known for development. Now you don't get as much time with some of these kids, but at the same time, the program that's in place is the right fit for many to take that jump, whether it's from freshman year, sophomore to junior year. We've seen it time and time again. And so, how do you see Jonathan Powell fit into our system? Obviously, still with some question marks around Drake Powell and Ian Jackson and their decisions that are impending.
I think he's going to be an underrated pickup, honestly. He's somebody that, he doesn't have the bigger numbers as some of these more experienced, proven players, but like you said, a freshman who broke into the rotation and really stuck in the rotation in that first year and carved out a role as a three-point shooter. He made more three-pointers than any freshman in the Big 12 this year. I think it was 65 three-pointers, about 35%. So that's a pretty good volume, especially for that first year. He's somebody in Hubert Davis's system who is really good from the corner, especially from the right corner. And then he's also on the right side of the floor. That's really his hot area in terms of three-point shooting. But he's somebody that could come in and be a specialist. Now, I think what's intriguing about him is he's not just a specialist. He's somebody who is very athletic. He's good in transition. He also is really good defensively. So he's somebody that projects as a two-way player, guard position, either two or three, and he has some versatility there, although they probably would look at him more at the two spot with his shooting. Somebody that could be a backup or even move into a starting role if he really takes off, even this year. I would expect him more like a part of the rotation off the bench. And then, like you said, the fact that he's only a sophomore coming in, he could be in the program for a couple of years. So this is somebody that I think is an intriguing prospect, a lot of potential there. He was not a very sought after high school prospect, three-star guy, I think in the low 100s. And so he just really emerged at West Virginia and really showed what he could do. The other thing so Inside Carolina did a really great breakdown when he committed, and one of the things that they said was the staff was looking at his high school tape too, because again, primarily a three-point shooter for West Virginia, that was his role on offense. And what Tanner and staff I think were saying was essentially this: you have more of a three-level scoring ability here. There's more that you can do. He does, I think, need to work on his ball creation ability, certainly finishing at the rim. Free throws was an area where he just did not shoot a lot of free throws. I want to say that was like 12 of 25, something like that, 48% from the line.
Mm.
But that's just a low volume and speaks to the fact that he was, again, the majority of his shots were from three.
Hmm.
Um, so what they're saying is, look, I think there's more, you're multidimensional offensively. So they like that. If nothing else, the floor is we get somebody, we need a knockdown shooter. This guy was very consistent last year. Could he be more consistent? He's got great balance on his shot. It's smooth, quick release, and in some of his highlights, you see the logo range that he has too, which I definitely like to see that. I mean, he can hit some deep and contested shots. So that's a huge piece. This team was going to need some shooters to come in and have some guys, whether it's rotation players or starters, they could rely on from the perimeter. And he definitely fits that for Carolina next year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we saw it from Ian Jackson. He had range as well, and you get, the addition of Jonathan Powell having range and 7 foot Veesaar down low. It really, you can feel it start to spread out the floor a lot, and that wears down a defense. And if all those players are contributing, it's just going to be, we hope, a different feel than what felt like ISO ball a lot of times, trying to make space, trying to find the open shooter, running down the shot clock, not getting what you want. That was a frustration for a big part of the year, at least up until February, until we finally found more of a rhythm going into March a little bit. He has a chance to play on a NCAA tournament team. West Virginia getting nixed this year by us, and now we steal one of their players. Kind of harsh. Not a great month. And the women's team beat up on West Virginia during the tournament. So, ouch. That's not been a good few weeks for West Virginia fans when it comes to their relationship with North Carolina.
With conference realignment, if we end up at some point in the same conference as West Virginia, maybe this is the start of the rivalry
There it
because
is.
you
Yeah.
mentioned those two, and then going all the way back to their coach who retired, who just had that awesome run to the Supers for the first time, and
Yep.
we knocked him out of the Supers. And I think it was the first time, at least in my memory, we retired a coach in the NCAA tournament in baseball. In other sports that had happened before, but in baseball, that's the
It
first
has.
one
It
I
has.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, anyway, and then Isaac McNeely, who ends up committing to Louisville,
Big hit
it
for them. Yeah.
it was, and I mean, there was that interest. He never visits Carolina, as it turned out, but him from West Virginia, I was thinking, if not only if we get a West Virginia player, but somebody from the state of West Virginia who
Right.
I think Mountaineers fans wanted to see him come back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we missed one opportunity there, but maybe there'll be
The
more
damage is
opportunities for
already
that.
done. Yeah.
I think so. I think so. So Powell is definitely a huge addition. Um, you mentioned Ian Jackson, uh, Ian and Drake. The consensus is there's just not a lot of clarity around what's going to happen. I think specifically because they're both waiting on draft feedback. Um, so we'll see what happens there. I This is more my gut confidence. At this point, I'm really not that confident that either comes back. Although, if I had to say between the two, I'm more confident in Drake just because he seemed to always have more of a multi-year plan, whereas Ian said repeatedly he was one and done. Like his goal was to get in, win a national championship, and Hubert was going to help him do what he needed to get on to the next level. So we'll see what happens there. But you're right. If you have Ian Jackson, like that changes things, or if you have somebody else to spread the floor, maybe that takes the pressure off the point guard position, which you talked about is now emerging as a really, really big question. Uh, Minutes before Veesaar commits today on
Yeah.
Friday.
Yeah, minutes before we're hopping on, we're literally hopping on 15 minutes after the Veesaar commitment, and yeah, the point guard situation we can dive into. Not great as Jay already referenced. One of the targets that is out there as an option is Jalen Lowe out of Pittsburgh, but there are other guys that are just not. either trending our direction or have already committed to other schools. And Jay, if you want to get into that breakdown a little bit, it's just a little bit scarce out there, and that's obviously a huge concern because as many issues at times as Elliott had with turnovers and some consistency last year. At times, his vision was also really on point, and when he was making plays and playing his A game, he was really sharp. Hopefully, he'll be a good fit at Michigan up there with Dusty May, but. We've got a question mark right now, as as you said. We've got our big guy. We won't be small, but who's going to throw him the ball?
Yeah, I think it's a frustrating time as a Carolina fan. I'm sure even within the staff too, because you feel this huge need that you had really all last season that was an issue, and now you have this other huge need that's opened up. And I guess my question is, I, I alluded to this when we talked with Lenzel earlier in the week, was I actually I actually supported the move. I thought it was the right move. Again, I'm not sure if it was mutual or who initiated it. Bottom line, that Cadeau is moving on. That's the right move for Carolina too, and for Cadeau, honestly, for him to get a fresh start. But for Carolina, huge gamble in a Hubert Davis make it or break it year here coming up to stick with Cadeau, and huge gamble to let him go because if he leaves and you don't have a clear plan in place, then you might really be in trouble. And that's granted, it's still early. It's April 4th. The portal closes on the 22nd. So a lot of things can happen. But the concern is what's the plan now? Because if we track back to talking about Nick Boyd, who visited and now looks like he's leaning Wisconsin, he got a crystal ball from 247 Sports to Wisconsin. Um, I guess I'm confused on if Boyd is the first person that visits, was that your top target? Was that just the first visit that you were able to confirm and get on campus, all those things? Um, I'm sort of in real time processing my confusion because
Mhm.
I'm wondering about if he was was he your top target, or you just felt like we like him, we want to add him in
Right.
some capacity, right? But you're using time there on Nick Boyd where that could be used on one of these other guys. And now we see in a matter of days here, I think it was yesterday that Silas DeMary commits to UConn. Um, we never got to a point where he was coming on campus at Carolina. Trey Donaldson, there was some buzz about him in contact with UNC, actually at Michigan. So he's transferring from Michigan. It would have been a Cadeau for Donaldson trade there. And he commits to Miami
So if we
yesterday.
get someone from Miami to Carolina, it's a three-way trade, as the NBA would say.
Maybe. I mean, Nigel Pack is still out there, so
You're
you
right.
could go that direction. Yeah, so you have Silas DeMary from Georgia goes to UConn. Donaldson goes from Michigan to Miami. Today, Jacoby Gillespie, who we talked about, maybe he follows
Hmm.
Willard to Villanova from Maryland, but instead he goes back to Tennessee. He played at Belmont originally. I think he's from Tennessee, so that makes sense for him. But so he's off the table. Things have really started to move towards Nate George. John Rothstein, I believe it was yesterday, reported that George had Zoom calls with Syracuse, Oklahoma, and Carolina. And there was optimism that maybe we can take this after this dead period that started on, it was late Wednesday night, Thursday morning, and then extends here. I can't remember when the cutoff is, but whenever the dead period ends for campus visits, that George would be one of those visitors. He commits to Syracuse, like we said, right before Veesaar. And that one, at least as a fan, it caught me by surprise. I'm curious. I mean, we won't necessarily know for the staff if that was a surprise or not, but it felt like Carolina was in a really good position there at a position of need, somebody that I think you could argue back and forth, is he an upgrade from Elliott or not, but there certainly were things to like in terms of he's a little bit better in terms of still a high turnover rate, but lower than Cadeau. Somebody who led the ACC, he led the ACC in assists, great vision, really good in the pick and roll. Pretty good looking to me, like mechanically, I like his jump shot. He just had not shot a percentage um, that you'd like to see is about 33, maybe 34%. So you'd like to get that up a little bit more. Part of that was he was taking really tough shots at Georgia Tech. Um, I went a little bit more in depth on Nate George because I was
You were
feeling
ready.
positive.
Yeah.
Um, so so he to me of those options was whether it was Trey Donaldson or Jalen Lowe, especially that was to me was the best option. Now there's a lot of people that would pick one of those other guys, and I think that's kind of one of the fun things about the portal is there's just a lot of debate about who is that best option, who should we go after. Um, but he would have been really solid and slide in really well with Veesaar and Wilson, especially as somebody who could distribute to them in the pick and roll game and feed them on lobs. Now he's off the table. The question is, where do you turn now? Jalen Lowe is the other guy that they have been in contact with, but is that somebody that they're zeroed in on? I would guess, because there's not a clear target otherwise. There's still time for other guys to enter the portal, but the question starts to become of these guys that we sort of had you see as the top point guards in the country, guys like Marcus Burton, who decides to stay at Notre Dame, Boogie Flan announced for the draft today as well from Arkansas. Um, Somebody that Carolina had recruited pretty heavily out of high school and actually played at the same high school as RJ Davis in New York. So it feels like there aren't a lot of at least visible options right now. And either it's going to take some time for some more guys to jump into the portal, or do you start to even look at an international route? But that's not the place they wanted to be. I think ideally they wanted to have the center position and the point guard position wrapped up here early on in the process, which they felt like they were on track to do, along with the forward position, potentially somebody like Cannon Catchings, who's been a name that's I think we talked about with Lenzel maybe too, transfer out of BYU. And it looked to be really exactly where they wanted to be. So this one stings because that's definitely a big miss with somebody that it felt like they were in the should be in the driver's seat compared to those other programs. Is the last thing I'll say is George is from Toronto, so he's a lot closer to home up there in Syracuse. But I imagine that was not the only thing that was part of this picture, given, money's not the only thing for these guys, certainly,
Hmm.
but the market this year continues to rise. And so these guys are also, I imagine, at least it was me, I'm going to get the best, the best offer, the best deal, right? And so that's part of it. So there's a lot of moving parts that we don't know about. I just was surprised. That definitely stung to see that happen because for me, I have questions of where do you turn at this point.
I guess that kind of leads me into my next question. And as I was just looking up some stats on the mention of Nigel Pack, do you have thoughts on Nigel Pack as someone who only played 9 games last season? What has been a star for Miami and has been a solid player. Is that a realistic outlook or something that you think Carolina should pass on or consider?
That's a great question. I don't know enough about, I think they would want to vet and have a sense of him as a total player, his leadership abilities on off court attitude as well, because Miami really struggled with some of their team culture, at least from the outside looking in,
Mhm.
the last couple of seasons when they also were struggling on the court too, which losing tends to lead to those issues cropping up, whereas winning tends to cure them.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pack was also injured the year before some too, so he's really been hurt by the injuries. Um, I don't know. It wouldn't be my first option. He has had periods where he's been a really good shooter from the perimeter. He is somebody that, like you said, he really started in that Final Four year in his first year at Miami, and he's definitely had his moments. So it's certainly not the worst option. He is a smaller player, I think. I want to say
Hmm.
he's more like 6 feet.
Yeah.
Um, so that was something where with George, he's 6'3", better defensively. You want to get a little bigger at the point of attack if you could. Um, yeah, so he wouldn't be my first choice, but he's a good player. I think maybe it is time to even just kind of gauge interest. But I'm sure they're having to do that. They're having to back channel and maybe there's a team that's still playing, whether it's the Final Four, whether is the NIT still going on. I think the championship might be coming up.
I'd say ask NC State, but they're not in it.
What about the college basketball crown? Are they
I
in
don't
that
think
one?
I don't.
No.
Is that a thing? That's a real thing? Oh yeah, it is a real
Yeah,
thing.
that's a real thing. By the way, Did you see did you see that in the Georgetown game in the Crown tournament that there was a Nebraska fan sitting in between two Georgetown
I
coaches?
did see that. Yeah. Yeah. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Why are we not in this tournament? I mean, look, the first four, I'd rather be in the tournament than not, but if we weren't we're gonna be on the line, let's get on the floor with with Hubert and the staff and just sit right in between them. I think that's the dream. Can we just make that a rule for the NCAA tournament too? I think that's what needs to
100%.
happen.
Yeah,
But point being, there are still teams that are playing in important and less important tournaments. Um, so you potentially could look in that area too. I think that's what
yeah,
you're going to have to do is back channel, see if there's players that can get in the portal because otherwise it's low right now. And other do you look at international options, but that can be kind of hit or miss depending on the player. We kind of seen that play out in college basketball where sometimes it can work really well and like Igor Demon at BYU this year and sometimes it's just a little bit more of a gamble.
for sure.
So I would probably stick with Lowe. I think he would be the one that you've already had communication there, but because they were focusing on George, now are they behind with Lowe?
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
what I'm
that's
wondering too.
that's part of the issue is when you focus in on somebody, now these other guys take a back seat. And I think that's a fair question. He's a guy that, for me, I mean, he is a little bit taller. I think he's about 6'2". He's a pretty slender player. He's really tough. He is a high volume player though. He takes a lot of shots, so he's definitely more of a lead guard. He would be somebody that they do need scoring. I think you still look at this lineup right now and trying to fill in the pieces. You're going to need perimeter scoring. He would bring that. Could he be more efficient, maybe with Carolina's roster compared to some of the challenges, struggles at Pitt this year? Maybe, but that would be my top concern is his overall efficiency offensively. But he's definitely a tough player. He can rise up in big moments. He had a big game against Duke in his freshman year 2 years ago in Cameron, the Blake Hinson game where Hinson was on the scorer's table at the end. Um,
Classic moment in Duke history.
Yeah, I just kind of had to take that in for a second
It's-
and think back. That was awesome.
Feels like
So
forever ago. My goodness.
it does, but he's had some big games, but again, you kind of just have to move and pivot to your next choice, your next option. And that was not where they wanted to be. And so without knowing the plan, it's hard to really say critique the plan. I think from the outside looking in, my question again is just what was the plan? And if you had guys identified, which you should have, if you're making this decision, then who was the top option? Why did we not go for them the hardest right away?
Mm,
And maybe we did. Maybe Boyd
right.
was the top option, and that didn't materialize for whatever reason
Yeah,
after the visit, and that can happen. But it just seems unclear. It is frustrating. Again, that's my outside perspective, and I don't
sure.
have the insight to know there might have been other barriers or things that happened that okay, that makes sense as to why this happened this way.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this too. Like 99% of us are sitting here on the outside. There are people
That's
with
right.
connections to the program, but part of the frustration and the difficulty in having patience and all this is that there's not much information coming out, especially nowadays, even this year, especially. I mean, look at the Drake and Ian situations. You might have heard rumorings of guys like Harrison last year about whether he's going to go pro, whether he's not. This year it's been pretty silent, and same with the visits. There's a little information around it, but it's pretty locked down, and so you just have to be patient as a fan, going forward. And that's a week or two feels like a month right now, trying to wait for news to come out or guys to commit or. At some point here in the near future, we're gonna hear something about Ian and Drake, and that's gonna change the dynamics of what we're looking at in the portal and who we might need or positions and how they shift. So I appreciate your insight on the Jalen Lowe prospect and also just your thoughts there on Nigel Pack for fans like honestly like myself who that name just kind of popped into my mind and I'm like I haven't looked at this guy, like I've heard the name, like what are his stats, could he be a good fit, and just trying to analyze it all as the tides kind of shift constantly, every single day. To your point about those visits with guys like Boyd, I have to imagine that, a program like Carolina, maybe there's scheduling complications around this is the guy we could get to come right now. I'm sure that's part of it, but I can't imagine wanting to bring a number two or three option in to spend time there and then kind of your number one being later on or whatever. I think they're pretty interested in Boyd is the hunch that I get or I have to assume. Again, that's limited. I don't have any insider info on that, but I think it's just a really complicated, fast landscape right now. But with guys like Jim Tanner and the team, I got to imagine they're doing things right. And the fact that we're able to get the big that we needed in Veesaar, absolutely huge. There's a lot of from what we've been reading out there and what we know about him and the highlights that we've seen, this is the best big that is out there, or at least up there in terms of what was available. And Jonathan Powell, as you mentioned, a very, very strong guard, good shot, and a lot of chance of development. So I feel good about both of those. We'll have to figure out the point guard situation. Things are moving so quickly. Yeah, I just happened to text you right after the Veesaar news, and I was like thinking to myself, we can't wait a day because it's gonna
It's
change. Like something's gonna
yeah.
be different. I was like, can you hop on? And so, here we are trying to provide some context and the best update we can.
I mean, that really is. We recorded on Monday, and by by the time we get
Wednesday
the
morning we
episode out
released
Wednesday
it. Yeah.
morning, yeah, Powell has already committed. I think at that point, Vasor's on his visit. It does happen really fast. Um, and I think you bring up something pretty important too about with Powell and with Vasar. That is the start of a amazing transfer class, in my opinion. These guys have a lot of potential. If you had an argument, I think you'd say have they proven it at the highest level in terms of being a starter and having that higher level of impact. I think you argue that both ways with Powell in terms of he's more of a role player in this first year. Vasar has not been the guy yet, but you can see it happening uh, in a full-time role. But all that to say, that's a really good start. And the vibes are really high because
Hmm.
then if you add the point guard to that, you can start to fill in the other pieces and you're in a really, really
Sure.
good position. And now it feels like just that room for error is just razor thin. I think that's the piece about the transfer portal we saw last year, right?
Hmm.
Is you miss on one of your top targets and you have a narrow focus on that person, then that can set off a real challenge in terms of where do we go from here. Um, Sometimes it works out really well. I think it was 2 years ago, Nick Timberlake was one of our top options who ends up going to Kansas. And instead, we get Cormac Ryan. And I really like that trade. Um, Timberlake just didn't translate the way that I think they thought coming from Towson at a mid major at Kansas. And Cormac was Cormac, where, yeah, he was streaky for sure. And he struggled from three for early in the season into January, even like early February, but then he
Hmm.
really, really caught fire.
Yeah.
And remember what happened in Cameron. So,
Oh my gosh, just thinking about it.
um, yeah, so it can happen both ways, but it's such a razor thin room for error. Uh, and it does move really fast. So it's exciting, but it's also equally frustrating. It makes you want to pull your
Stressful,
hair out
man.
when it
God, I gotta
doesn't.
detach every now and then.
Yeah.
Stressful if you think about it too much.
Yeah, which like this commitment, so many people were waiting for Vasar to commit publicly and get this out there and have it be a done deal and celebrate. And it does just dampen the celebration when one of your other top targets commits minutes before. So we'll see what they do. I imagine even by even by right now, since we've been talking, here's another plan that's, I mean, they already had, I'm sure, something else in mind, or at least they're developing what that's going to be. And maybe it is low, maybe it is somebody else, but we'll talk about it once it emerges publicly, and I'm sure have lots of thoughts about what direction they go. And hopefully we start to get more information to during this dead period about the other guys on the roster, right? Officially, if Trimble, which does seem like he's going to be back, what do Ian Jackson and Drake Powell do? Is Van Allen Lubin officially back? What about some of these other guys like Kate Tyson? Is he coming back, and is he going to be on the roster again? There's still questions with that part of it. So hopefully we get some clarity too there. Maybe that does help. But I also hope that getting that center, you would hope that with the guys they have in the front court now, with Wilson and Vasar, That would be pretty attractive to
Yeah, I was gonna
some of
bring that
these,
up too.
yeah,
Hmm.
some of these point guards that maybe have not been in the portal yet, or guys that maybe they dig a little bit deeper on, and identify somebody perhaps at a mid-major level that they want to look into a little bit more. Um,
Maybe
I know
Boyd's
there's,
over there like son of a Veesaar signed.
well, maybe, and I mean, he could have, since we've been talking, committed officially. When we started talking, he was not officially committed. So, do you go
Yeah,
back to him? Do you go back
right,
to him?
right.
And
There's
was it
so many changing dynamics in this.
so many pieces? It's not done until it's done, and even then, you have to wait for somebody to get to campus. Like, I don't feel comfortable really until the season starts. Honestly, we've seen that.
Yeah,
As other things can happen in between, but it's really until they get to campus in May or June that okay, this is real. This guy's going to be here.
right.
Because otherwise, you can always have somebody go back. So that is another point: is you might have somebody who's committed, but they can still change their mind
Yeah,
until they actually come on campus and enroll. They can go back, and so you might have other guys come back open. You could even have high school commits who get recruited over. The LeBaron Philon situation at Kansas was a really good example last year. A really, really good player, obviously, at Alabama this year. So you never know. There might be something like that too, where you could get a high quality freshman player. Wouldn't be my preference, would be to get somebody with experience, but
hmm.
we'll see.
We're just playing chess out here. It's a very, very complicated landscape. So
Yeah.
let's hope
Chess,
we're
or
playing
what's
chess.
what's something that's more of a reactive game?
Yeah.
Pinball?
Ping pong, as I called it the other day. It
Ping
was the
pong,
guy that
yeah.
went from Ohio State to South Carolina, back to Ohio State, back to South Carolina.
Yeah, yeah, the Michi Johnson.
Gosh,
Yeah, that's new. We've
it's a
we've
different kind of game.
had plenty of guys go back, go transfer, and then go back to their original school the next year or a couple years later. But this
Twice.
is the first time that you've seen somebody go back and forth twice between the same two schools. Pretty
Just
wild.
kind of defines the time, says it all right there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you had to sum it up just with one picture of a player, it would be Michi Johnson, just with how just it just is wild. It's a wild time. We're seeing stuff that has never happened before. Um, but yeah, so maybe we'll see something like that that goes in our favor, right? It's something that we did not expect, something wild that emerges here. Or maybe it's something that makes more sense. That's the logical, the simplest explanation, right? Is the most logical explanation. Well, that's Occam's Veesaar, I think, is the principle in
That's
research.
right.
Um, you can cut that one
That's
if you want. That's
that's
super
gotta stick.
cheesy.
Yeah, I can't cut that. That's gotta stick. That's the great dad joke, and you are dad, so I gotta keep it.
Well, I think that's. I mean, I think those are the updates because we
Yeah.
haven't checked our phones while we've been talking.
We haven't checked. That probably means that Nigel Pack has looked at his last name and said, "I'm going to go play for Will Wade," and then there's
There you
something else
go.
wild that happens, and
There
we
you go.
blink and we got to do another emergency pod. Doing our best, guys. Trying to stay on it.
We're doing our best. I mean, I think like Pack is a good example of somebody that maybe a reset somewhere else could get him back to that level that he had in his first year at Miami, just because things that had been challenging in Larinaga's last 2 years, right? And
For
so
sure.
I think that's fair. So you never know.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. We'll see if that's a direction they go.
Yeah, yeah. Time will tell. So, yeah, stay tuned. We'll do our best to keep you guys updated. But for now, that's the latest. And as always, we'll say go Heels and go anybody but Duke going into the weekend.
Go Heels, go Cougars, go Gators, go
Go
Tigers.
Tigers. Go them all. And go Heels.
Go Heels.